Okay, finish this sentence. Work should feel more like blank and less like blank.
More like fuel for, your sense of accomplishment, less like a grind.
Damn right.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Hey, welcome to Your Work Friends. I'm Francesca Ranieri.
And I'm Mel Platt.
Mel, what's going on?
Spring is springing.
Has it sprung?
Almost. Last week was the Arctic cold here, but this week it is sunshine almost until 6:30. So, and I hear the birds chirping. I will take it. How about you? What's going on with you?
Say what you will about Portland in the winter. We've had a very sunny winter for Portland, but what most people might not know about Portland is in the winter, the moss turns like an electric green. It's like almost fluorescent. So it's just a very cool time to be here.
I love it.
Yeah.
Pretty.
Yeah. I got to enjoy the nature, got to enjoy the nature.
You do. I think I'm one of those sad sufferers, the seasonal affective disorder. I have one of those lamps. Have you seen those lamps that help you slowly wake up with the sunshine and set? Like I use that. I need the atmosphere to feel it. Sunshine included.
Totally get it. Completely get it. Completely get it. Yeah.
Well, we met with Jennifer Moss. Jennifer is a workplace expert, Harvard Business Review columnist, author of Unlocking Happiness at Work, author of The Burnout Epidemic, and now her new book, Why Are We Here? And it's all about creating workplace cultures where everyone wants to work. And we just had such a fantastic conversation with her. Francesca, what did you think about this conversation?
Yeah, I was stoked to talk to Jennifer because she is, to me, the leading person to look at on burnout. Any of the work that Jennifer does, it is absolutely locked and loaded with the latest research on things. To have her answer the question around how do you create a culture that people actually want to show up for was really interesting. The book is fascinating. She is someone that, how you meet people, like they're so accomplished and they're so freaking good at what they do. And then they're just a very cool person on top of that. Jennifer Moss.
Yeah, 100%. She was amazing. I couldn't agree with you more. You and I talk about this all the time. COVID and then our own life experiences and things that happen outside of work have really reprioritized what is meaningful for us and where our priorities stand, our values going forward. And I think so many people are going through kind of that level setting and gut check for themselves. What I really loved about Jennifer's book, and I do want to read a quote that she started with that made me really think about what most people are going through. She mentions that people aren't less ambitious or lazy. We're just feeling uninspired. And that really stood out to me. And I was like, yes, 100%. She's weaving together all of these really big concepts about work and providing tangible things that you can do today for yourself, for your team, to make workplaces that are inspiring.
It's practical, tangible. And most of the things that she talks about in the book and with us are things you can do in 20 minutes or less.
Sold at 20 minutes or less.
20 minutes or less. 20 minutes or less. Like, come on, let's go. Let's go.
Yeah, let's do this. Yeah. Well, friends, with that, here's Jennifer Moss. Jen, I'm going to jump right in here. What is the biggest myth about workplace culture that you'd like to bust today?
I love this, that workplace well-being is antithetical to work ethic. This idea that you can't have one without the other. If you invest in well-being and you invest in employee happiness, that somehow that's just like a nice to have and you're a human-centered leader. And I think it's an ego thing. Like I'm just doing this for you because it's so important that people are happy and, I'm a hero for that. And instead it's really, if you're a capitalist, if you want to be competitive, if you want to have a really, future ready organization, you invest in well-being.
I love to hear you say that because I think back to the days where when work-life balance was the
Oh,
thing
yeah.
and people were like, who needs that? Like it's a
Yeah.
badge of honor to just drive yourself into the ground, but it's
Mhm.
bad for business, right?
It is bad for business. And I wrote this article for Harvard Business Review that I think it went viral because people felt really connected to this idea of toxic productivity. And the title was Let's End Toxic Productivity. There is this heroic attitude towards people that don't sleep and they don't eat and they don't even take time to go pee. They just work all the time. It's like they're the high performing people. And that's just because they feel like that's what they have to do to be able to be promoted. It's not anyone's real desire, but it's become something we celebrate. And we need to get better at looking at rest as not a 4-letter word, that it is actually good for all of us and it makes us more productive and leads to lots of good business outcomes.
Listen, I am all for bringing back the afternoon nap. Anyone a
Mhm.
fan from kindergarten? I feel like that was a good refresher. So
Love that.
let's build that in. Well, you write that work is fundamentally broken. How did we get here?
This is a long time coming. The office is 550 years old. We have sort of behaved in the same way around that same framework. I mean, we went from 7 days a week to 6 to 5. So now we're in the 5 zone, which has been the last 100 years. But, nothing's really changed about work and going into the office and it being very transactional. But I say since the advent of the car phone, where we were able to move our work into the new office, which was our car, that changed work from a transactional relationship to a social contract. You're asking us to bring work into our home, into our personal life. That really breaks the expectation. And so we've had this unwinding of what our expectation of work has been and also the demands on us to be working all the time with all these blurred lines. And there was a point in the pandemic, which crises do, they exacerbate all those existing problems that were there, that were boiling and exploded them. And so in the last 5 years, it's like we went from breaking to broken. And now we have to figure out a new framework for work.
Well, throughout the book, you really explored why so many of us are feeling unfulfilled at work. Do you think this is a modern problem or is this something we've always struggled with?
When you look at Gallup's engagement data, it sort of stayed the same. We are at the worst level of active disengagement levels that we've seen in a decade. So it's extraordinarily bad now as far as how many people are actually happy at work. It always really has stayed in that, globally around 13, 15%. And in the US, it's 30-ish, Canada, same thing. But so there's really a huge swath of the workforce that hasn't really been happy at work. But what I believe is that we had a different expectation of it before, and we knew part of it was going to be a grind. And there was generations that felt like, okay, that's just part of work, is that it's not going to always be enjoyable. And I'm okay with that. I have different expectations from it, different identity. And your identity about what you did was more important than, say, pay or work-life balance or some of those other things. So our frame of reference in the last 5 years has really changed. And so, yeah, things like flexibility used to be a perk. Now it's a right. We look at being able to not be sick at work, like expecting not to be burned out. That has definitely become more of an expectation. And yet we're seeing higher levels of burnout than we ever have, even since peak pandemic. And, we're asking more of work and work is asking more of us. And so I think we're becoming more disconnected. Each group is being more disconnected from the other. Like this data point that I had in the book on the purpose gap, you see 85% of executives really do see and they feel their purpose. They say they live their purpose every day, whereas only 15% of frontline managers and employees feel their purpose every day. We've lost the expectation of work and we have a new frame of reference. And also when you're trusted with something, like everyone was allowed to work remotely, we did really well with that. There was investments in well-being, which was really great. There was investments in DEI, which felt really good. Employees felt like, okay, here's the moment where we're going to turn the corner and there's going to be respect and there's going to be an understanding of our needs. There's going to be empathy and compassion. And then 5 years later, and all of those things are being clawed back, it feels like, oh, now I don't feel as much hope. And so I think that's been catastrophic to levels of engagement and happiness at work.
Why are we here? It's such a well-researched book. It covers a ton of ground. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the 3 key areas leaders really need to approach differently.
How I ended up really thinking about this book is that I really do think it's a stacking kind of on based on the first part, which are foundations, and then it's addressing the novel challenges because it's a whole new framework. We're in the multiverse of work. We've skipped, timeline. We're not even in the future of work. So that's sort of in this business challenges that we have to face. And then the third part is, how do we hit those shared goals? And so the foundation, and I even think the first chapter being hope is the most critical skill that leaders need to have right now. And Gallup actually just posted this really great data point a few days ago, which was amazing, that showed that the entire workforce is pretty much feeling the same way, that leaders that have hope are what they need right now. But it's really hope, purpose, and community. So feeling a sense of mattering and feeling like you have friends, that work isn't just like going to school without art, gym, or recess. There's actually like kibitzing, like you talk about, and fun and joy. And then those novel challenges that we need to deal with, I talk about from a sense of compassion, freedom, and openness. And compassion is really, how do I take my empathy and that active listening into action with AI, fear of becoming obsolete, this sense of, I hear you, but I'm not doing anything about it. And this is why we need compassion. Then we have freedom. The idea of flexibility is so focused on where, but how can we maybe think about it for the 60% of the non-remote enabled workforce? Like why and with whom and what we do and when we do it. There's lots of ways that we can create flexibility for that group. And just freedom is such a fundamental part of who we are. And when that strips away, we will resist it to our death. I mean, it is baked into us. And so the way that people are tackling these return to office mandates are just terrible. And then, openness is generational divides. We need to be listening to each other more. And belonging and recognition is really, how can we have a shared vision if we can't pull people together? We're going to have just a siloed vision, and we know that doesn't work. So it's about pulling people together in a sense of belonging for all of us to work better together.
I think each of those stacks is so important, and each of those layers is so important. And we're not going to go through all of the stacks on this episode, but we do want to double click into a few of them that just seem so critical and so anchoring. And I want to talk about hope first, because I will be honest, I read the Gallup research last week, read your book as well. And I was thinking the first time I read it, I was like, we've grown up professionally saying hope is not a strategy in the book. And now Gallup also validates it. It's actually scientifically proven to be a strategy, and you can operationalize hope. I'm curious about hope. When we are wondering why we are here, hope is the answer. Why is that?
It's amazing because I spent some time, and you would have read the book, where I talked to senior leaders in the military that say hope is their only strategy. And they say, think about it. You're sending people out on a mission that could risk their lives. And if they don't feel hopeful, they are not going to, even sign up for that.
Yeah.
Or they're not going to be able to achieve their mission because they don't see the point of it. They don't see that there's a potential for them to hit that goal. It's too risky. And so you extrapolate that across any organization. That's the same way about asking people to risk when it comes to ideas or innovation or, being psychologically safe. All of those things are dependent on people feeling like that what they do is actually going to come to some sort of fruition, or it's going to be helpful, or they can see themselves in the future of their organization. We're trying to get everyone on board with AI, you don't have hope. You do not get anyone on board with AI. And this is why we see 1 in 2 of the global workforce now saying they have AI anxiety. Hope is super fundamental. And I actually feel like it's the economic tool that we need if we're really looking at solving big policy problems. We're talking about women, and this whole fertility crisis is a big conversation we're having all the time. And so you see countries putting in a whole bunch of money for women at work, 4-day work week in Korea, and these types of things. But when you actually talk to women and families that are talking about why they're putting off having children, they say, I don't see a world where I can bring a child into.
Ugh,
So it
that's
is
freaking
not,
heavy.
it is heavy, and it's not financial incentives that we need to give people now. It's hope. This is the economic driver that we all need across organizations, societally and globally. And until we really get to that upstream kind of thinking about it,
Yeah.
we're still going to be in crisis in the next 20 years.
I want to double click on this because we talk to a lot of folks, especially at the middle management level, that are burnt out. They feel like they've been asked to do more, just like you said. They're feeling that discrepancy between feeling purpose and being like, what purpose, you know? And so when you say hope is the strategy, and then we have middle managers that are feeling just, how the hell am I supposed to have hope? What does hope look like for me as a middle manager? How do I show up with hope when I've got 55,000 things going on? How do you respond to that?
So I love that you've asked me this, because hope is actually one of the easiest skills that we can build. And so much of the book is changing culture in 20 minutes or less. Like I've been saying, it's just these 20-minute meetings here, these incremental shifts over here. It's not a big value change. It's actually middle managers are the ones that are the most empowered to make these changes. And when you think about hope, it's really based on Snyder's hope theory. And this is what I've talked about for many, many years. It's this idea of having goals. So really focus in your team around setting goals, and not 5-year goals, but how do we set daily, weekly, monthly goals that lead up to that year, that lead up to that big career pathing 5 years. And then the second part is having pathways. So you're planning your goals, but do you have a plan B? Do you have a plan C? Do you have a plan Z? Having secondary and tertiary plans around your goals makes you feel like that one goal, if I don't hit it this way, I have all this other backup. I've had all
Yeah.
this other planning to hit that goal. And then it's about agency. We need autonomy in hitting those goals. Google does a great job co-creating goals, talking with peers. Peers celebrate. It's fluid. It's just challenging enough that you feel like you've accomplished something, but not so challenging that you could never accomplish it, and not too easy that you feel like, oh, well, that was easy. So you don't feel that sense of accomplishment when you reach it. All of this builds up cognitive hope day to day. And, Lululemon is really good. I was their happiness strategist way back, and they do a good job of having these BHAGs, these big, hairy, audacious goals. But then they also they celebrate the small wins. So that weekly goal or the monthly goal, the manager can be like, yeah, like sticker, like here's a gift card at the end of, you achieving this 2-month goal or this quarterly goal. Like these are the things that we need to help people do, because subconsciously it builds up our hope capacity, our cognitive hope. And the more hope we feel, the more we feel like we can accomplish bigger goals. And then the more risk taking we are, the more innovative we are, the more cohesive we are with the rest of our team, because we're working, we're gelling together in a really helpful kind of way. It just breeds such a good social contagion of hope across the culture.
Yeah. I love that. I know you've talked about it in some of your past books too, but that idea of chunking things out for your folks. And it doesn't need to be the BHAGs. We all love the BHAGs and the moonshots, and it's all sexy, but sometimes it just comes down to those small wins until you get the bigger wins, and chunking it for your folks. I want to talk about purpose too, because we talked about hope and then you pull up into purpose, right? That's that second element of that strong foundation that you talk about. When it feels like your org is on the fourth reorg, and you actually don't know where the hell it's going, but you're leading a team and you're like, all right, here's our purpose. Like, how do you do that in that 20-minute sprint?
This is a really key, I think, when you ask me of like, what are the things that we get wrong about leadership and culture, this is another place where we fall short. A lot of And it's because of the purpose gap. A lot of the people in that executive role feel very connected to the big mission statement. They feel it, like they're in it. But most of the workforce doesn't really care about the big mission statement. They're not thinking about the vision every day. They're really in the work. And sometimes that work can feel very monotonous, really boring. And so you want to stop trying to make it so far away from people. You want to tie their day-to-day work into things that people care about. And you do this in this way that's very practical. And I've watched this intervention and tried it across organizations, and it's been incredible. But it's 20 minutes of a non-work related check-in where you ask what lit you up, what stressed you out, and what can we do for each other to make next week easier. So the lighting up piece, managers are able to kind of get clues into what excites people. What do you care about? Does it really matter that your kids are in a good school? Do you care about watching Broadway films? Do you have a passion for going to New York once a year and seeing all the Broadway films? I mean, these are things where it should seem innocuous, but it's really great data. This is where you're like, how do I motivate people and connect their day-to-day tasks to that thing? And then when you look up, at the stressors, people aren't going to say what they're stressed out about to their boss in week 1 or week 2.
Absolutely not. You're putting on the front,
It takes months actually, but that consistency and frequency and managers showing up every week saying, I'm still going to ask and I'm still going to share my stressors. That vulnerability and leadership opens up psychological safety amongst the team. So people then start sharing like what is going on. And if you create an open space, people will tell you, this is what I need. This is what's holding me back from connecting to my purpose or doing what makes me feel good every day. And so over time, consistency and frequency builds trust. And then you get to use this. And then the quick win piece is the hope building. So every single week, you're helping each other cohesively in this team building thing, like helping each other to solve problems. And so work gets easier, gets more fun. It's less toxic. It's also less exhausting. And you can help each other. You learn these small ways that you can tactically help each other with workload. And so overall, you start to feel like your work has more meaning. It matters more. You feel more aligned with your motivators and your purpose to the day-to-day tasks. And it changes so much of how people feel about their work and how it contributes and makes an impact.
I love that too, because at the end of the day, sometimes I think about if you distill down what everybody just really basically needs at a human level, it's just to be seen, or for someone to be interested, genuinely like, what does light you up, or what are you about? You and me together, human to human. It's like simple, elegant questioning that really helps you as a manager understand and get the data to your point, but also enable someone to feel seen. We've all had leaders where we felt that potentially, hopefully you have, and you have had leaders where they don't give a shit about life. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Don't care. Yeah.
they don't care. And you're kind of dying for them to ask or just be interested. Like, do you even know me? I had a leader one time ask me how my kids are doing after I'd worked with them for 4 months. I have a kid. I don't have 2. And it was just, it's like those moments where it's like, you're not even in this. This is so transactional for you. I love that on the one-on-one. And the other thing I want to ask about, you talk about the importance of friendships at work. Mel and I, actually, fun fact, we're work friends. And then we started this podcast. And so we know the value of work friendships. But I'm wondering how organizations can facilitate community more, like the idea of like true community.
This has always been something that I've been so interested in, is this community piece, because going to work and not having that person, just a single person there, that's all you need. But people that don't have that, it's just a very miserable experience for them. And I wrote about that in the burnout epidemic, like a toxic, unhappy group of people that you work with can actually reduce your lifespan. Like that's how detrimental it is on your mental health and well-being.
Yeah.
So you need to have that person, or else work just feels really lonely. And what's happened in the last 5 years, and everyone wants to blame it on remote work, but I don't think that that's the case. And I've shared really the data to say it's not remote work that has impacted relationships. We've been dealing with loneliness at work for a long time, but it's that we have organizations that just focus on simplex relationships, which are transactional, like you said. It's that I need you for this. It's basically a shared services, and that's how you interact. But organizations that really focus on building multiplex relationships where it's, I know you and I know that you have a kid, not two kids or three kids. And I know that like this is where that non-work related check-in comes in handy because it's about developing more robust relationships that create bonds. And what they found in the last 5 years, especially with these return to office mandates, when people go back into the office, it's not like they're spending more time doing what we should be doing, which is collaborating and connecting with each other and bringing back rituals. I love that Atlassian has the hackathon every quarter, and there's companies that do a really good job of pulling people together to do cool stuff and they build relationships. We've lost a lot of investment in team building and networking, and a lot of that social piece, that social binding is gone. And so right now, the way that we've developed friends would be different than you and Mel, which would be organic. It used to be like you'd walk in the office and maybe you were friends with someone in marketing. Maybe you talked to someone in accounting. You'd have ways of having conversations with lots of different people. We've continued to hear in the data is that it's very siloed now. So we only care about our team. We don't know anything going on across the rest of the organization. And the thing that I used to look for, which was compatibility and, if you made me laugh or we were both interested in cool movies, now we're looking for conscientiousness and accountability. Those are the traits we're looking for in our friendships, which is very, yeah,
It's very
who wants to go dancing on Friday night with their accountable, conscientious friend? Like, no one. And so not doing it to with our country.
Yeah, that's why.
that does not sound fun.
It's just, that's it. We're only looking to have relationships at work that will continue to foster better work. And to me, like that is the thing that we need to rework is bringing people back into spaces where, like I was talking in the book about the third space, making it like Starbucks, where you're going there to debate and discuss and be connected, and then you go home or wherever to your own little world to do the heads down stuff. But right now, going into work is just like a replica of working from home, and that's not building any sort of friendship or community that anyone really cares about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting though. I mean, companies could totally reimagine those spaces to be more communal or like office as an amenity to foster that organic relationship building or get back to it.
Yeah, and we're so time starved and we're so burned out that our social tank is really, has been depleted. And so again, it's like hygiene. We need to manage overwork. We need to create space for people to actually connect. In the 20 minutes or less, Cornell research in the book said 20 minutes of having lunch with one person once a week completely changed the dynamic of organizations. They found that morale was improved, job satisfaction increased, people made less mistakes, which I thought was really interesting. Their work performance improved. And that was 20 minutes of just having lunch away from your desk once a week. It's super simple again, but these are the things that create incremental network effect that we're all kind of doing some of these pieces of the puzzle. Eventually the culture will flourish.
It's funny. You know what I was thinking about the other day? If I could do my career all over again, there's like 5 things I would do. But one of them would be I would have the 20 minutes, the lunch away from my desk more, but I would invite someone from an accounting or the gal in marketing or whatever, just to network more earlier on and just go to lunch with people more. I wish I would have done that. It's so nourishing.
It's so special. I worked in a big law firm when I first started out in New York, and we did have that. We had a lunch crew and they had a cafeteria, but everyone knew everyone. It was a mixture of administrative staff, paralegals, even like the lunch staff crew would come in and eat with us. And it was one massive table. There were 25 of us every single day. That's what we looked forward to. And we talked about everything but work. And it just made our week, but it made work better. And to this day, even though that firm's long gone, they merged with someone else, the building's been taken over, but there's a Facebook group of alumni from that workplace, down from everyone to security to all that crew, because that's how close we were. It was like a very special environment, which you don't see anymore, really.
I love that, Mel. I love that because in the book, I shared a case study of this person I interviewed at a tech company, and he met with a lot of his coworkers and people in the building for lunch. they were pulled back on a project that ended up making them having to work all these long hours, and slowly but surely they abandoned their lunch. And he said that his team started dropping out and moving to competitors. And even in the exit interviews, for me, it just felt like we stopped having lunch. We stopped caring about each other. It's more than that. It's more to a lot of people. And he ended up after 6 years being on a track to be in a high position in that organization, left to a competitor. And he initiated the lunches in his other place, and it became this whole popular thing again. It's so much more than people realize. It's the pausing, it's the connecting, it's the not talking about work, it's developing these depth of bonds that sustain. And we're not investing in that anymore because we're thinking 20 minutes. Oh, well, that means I have to leave 20 minutes late. I'm going to be stuck in traffic. It just means more work when I come home at night. I'll be in my pajamas working till midnight. When you're burned out, when you have that kind of toxic productivity, you don't engage in 20-minute lunches.
No, I also am a fan of in virtual environments because I do think you could do this in a virtual environment, like
Yes.
having a fun weekly debate on something random, like is a hot dog a sandwich? Put it up on
No,
Teams for everyone to contribute to the
Right.
conversation, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you make it? What's a weekly question? You could, but like, get
not-
creative. What can you do to engage everybody across the org? I
Yes.
don't know.
Is pot fruit considered to be acceptable on a pizza? Yes.
No,
But
it is. You know, that is a good question.
yeah, you have lots of debate, but I do think
Yeah.
there needs to be levity,
Yeah.
and a little bit of joy.
Well, you talk a lot about all of the new challenges, and boy, do we have them. AI, multi-generational workforce. I think we just read something recently about Gen Z doesn't even want what we have. So there's a whole problem there. The backlash on DEI, the backlash on remote work, extensive burnout, as you write about. Employee happiness is just continuing to drop. When you think about all of these new challenges, what's the one thing workplaces need to focus on now to overcome the competition against all of these things when they're trying to create a good culture?
One of the things I keep telling leaders that I work with is, why do you feel like 5 years into this complete cataclysmic shift in work that you're supposed to have it figured out? I mean, no one even knows what hybrid is. Like, why is it 2 or 3 days a week? We don't even know. Hybrid could be 4 times a year. Hybrid could mean lots of different things. And there is this kind of ego, I think, around us needing to have this thing sorted and wanting to just put the pandemic and now poly crisis on some sort of back burner and not think about it. And so I've been saying the one thing that leaders need to do is just let go of all of that, sort of that expectation, and recognize with self-awareness that we are in a completely different mindset. The behavioral mindset of this workforce today is clearly different. The priorities have shifted. We have Gen Zs that do see us as terrible models for what work looks like. Most of us burning out, all of us resigning, saying we hate work. We're not great models. And so, of course, they're going to say, I don't want that. And they're going to find new avenues. We're losing our mature workers. They're retiring early at a pace that we've never seen before. And they say, I don't really fit into this workforce. It's changed. So let's get on top of that and say, okay, let's be agile. Let's iterate. Let's test. Let's see if this works. And if it doesn't, that's okay. We're going to be just much more fluid in the way that we build our strategies until we feel like over time, I feel like we're in the pilot stage of this experiment that, when you look at 550 years old for the office, we're looking at a pretty long time before we're going to get any of this kind of mapped out. So for me, it's about self-awareness, agility, and pausing and kind of coming up with a new plan.
Yeah. Well, it's also like, will we really ever have this all mapped out? Or is this just start being okay with the unknown and working together to be like, I don't know either, and we'll figure it out together?
I love that you say that because even 5-year strategies right now, when we have Gen AI and what's changed, we have to imagine that that's going to be 5 years where the things that we thought were going to happen have been totally changed around. And so that is really it, is understanding that we're in a state of uncertainty and will be for quite some time now. That's why if you really want to be successful, it is managing through change and learning how to do that much better. Unfortunately, we just see a demographic of CEOs. Most of them are male, most of them are in their 60s. And it's been very difficult. We've seen just that, like trying to shift over into, especially what Gen Zs are asking for. That feels so foreign. It feels so far away from the way that they were professionally raised. So I have empathy for both groups, but we do need to connect somewhere because having divisions that and us being that far apart in our goals, there's no way we can hit those plans, that vision, if we don't start talking to each other.
Yeah, if we can't find common ground, it is moving to a danger zone. I think last week, Francesca and I were covering New Week, New Headlines, and we read something around how I think it was like 73% of Gen Zs that were polled. Don't quote me on this because I think it was somewhere around there where they were mentioning they don't even want the job. Like we're heading for a manager meltdown this year, in fact, because they can't find common ground and what they see is what they don't want. But as you mentioned, it's deeply affecting the future of organizations and business. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how can we start to find common ground?
I say first across the organization, even managers can do this. How often do you express frustration with an entire generation? And how often do we have conversations like, oh, I'm so frustrated, like my boomer, my Xer, whatever manager, usually Xers are boomers. Everyone's a boomer if they're over the age of like 45. So it's like, how does
Being an
my
Xer, I don't
Yeah.
appreciate that. I do not appreciate being.
I don't like being lumped in
kind
there,
of
but
disturbance to get everyone
too.
say I'm a boomer. So it's like anyone over a certain age, it's kind of like this exasperation. And yet then we see this rise of youngism. We've never seen it this harsh before, where young people are coming into the office and it's basically like they're already defined as lazy, entitled. And if they do ask for things like respectful hours so that they can have friends. I mean, they're just trying to meet people and develop relationships that might be long lasting so they can have family and plan their lives. But if you're working 60 or 70 hours a week, it's just not appropriate for anything else in your life. The fact that they're asking for this with this perception that they're just lazy, it seems like what they're asking for is just so Gen Z. That puts people off. They're opting out of the workforce because of it. They're willing to accept an extraordinarily less amount of pay. All the data showing like it's up to 37% less pay to have work life balance. So for them, they're not like Xers and boomers were, where it was buy the house, get married, have kids. So you'd have all these golden handcuffs tying you to your job. They're putting off buying homes later because of the situation that they're in. They just don't have that. They're living longer with their parents. They're not getting married. They're not having kids. So their ability to be mobile and take less pay makes it so we're not holding on to them and with the same carrot. And that means having to be flexible. And so I keep telling managers, just like audit your language, audit the narratives that go on in your organization, try to remove those things that really do separate you. Auditing your language really changes how you feel about another group. And I should also say the youngest generation, their their whole point is to push back on the status quo. Like that's what you expect. Every
Mhm.
generation does that. Why are we surprised that this generation is pushing back on the status quo? Like this is their job. This is every generation's job, is to question whether the generation before them have done the right job, societally and politically and economically. And every generation's done that. So here we have another generation that's just coming in to tell us we're doing a bad job. That's the way it goes.
I feel like Gen Z's role is actually to remind us that we're all human beings in here for a finite amount of time. So maybe we should all stop prioritizing work as the number one priority.
I love it. I say
Yeah.
Gen Zs say well-being
Love it.
is not antithetical to work ethic.
Hmm.
And they say that loud and clear. And I fully agree with that. So it's probably
Yeah.
why I have maybe my bias to say, let's listen to Gen Zs because, maybe they're pushing the pendulum really far in one direction, but that's the only way that we're going to have change that sort of meets in the middle. So let's let them do that and then figure out a way that sort of marries all worlds.
Couldn't agree more. Another big topic is AI.
Mhm.
And you talk about the fear of becoming obsolete. So, how can leaders navigate all of what's happening in AI today and really kind of squash the FOBO that's happening for their teams?
So I love the term FOBO. I mean, Gallup really struck it with that one. I love JOMO, the joy of missing out. That's one of my
Yeah.
favorite, but FOBO is a good one too. The data is showing that it's really increasing and it's increasing a lot for younger cohorts. It used to be automation. So mature workers were ones that were at most threat. And you saw that obsolescence really coming out in that group, but our younger generation are feeling it. And a lot of that is that we've got, again, like hyperbolic language. We're in a mass extinction event, iRobot, and everything's going to fall apart, or it's 300 million jobs are going to be lost, or then it's everything's rosy with AI, everything's going to be great. They're going to be our pilot, and you won't have to work again. And I don't like the idea of people not wanting to work or not working again. That's an economic catastrophe because how are we going to care for everyone not working? And B, just from a human standpoint, we get a lot of fuel from work. And so I have this LinkedIn course that you basically took that chapter of FOBO and brought that in to say, how do we create AI enthusiasm instead of AI anxiety? Because it's here and that's the reality. And so we need to normalize it. We need to talk about how ubiquitous AI is in the rest of our lives so it isn't so scary. We need to make sure that people feel skilled up and not overlooking mature workers because we're seeing that they're getting constantly overlooked for training in AI. It's kind of like both of them are giving up. And yet, pretty robust research looked at mature workers and said, and there was 40% of them that said, I would stay longer if I had this continued training, if I felt like you were training me up to handle this, but I'm overlooked constantly. So there's things that we need to do around training and just preparedness. We also want to create curious cultures. Have a once a month meeting around some new experimentation that you had with AI. You share it back with the team. It can be personal or professional. You can have some personal, some professional. So you can talk about, oh, I did this trick and I used AI and now I've been able to do my work faster. It's been great. So that's really important is create experimentation. And I would say the most important part, and this is probably at the executive leadership level, is we need to deliver on the promise of AI. So the promise of AI was that you will have your mundane tasks taken away and then you will have really creative, cool work that you get to do. A lot of people that I've interviewed are saying, I had the mundane stuff taken away, but now I have extreme boredom and I'm not getting any of that. So there's a promise undelivered. And then also, Gen AI is supposed to save us time. So if we're finished our, project early, we should be given that time back. It shouldn't be that we're just adding more productivity when it's supposed to create efficiencies. So these are two things at the policy level that I think executive leaders need to say, are we delivering on the promise of AI in these two areas? And maybe it's changing the way we measure productivity. It's more around goals, not hours. And so that's at the GDP level that we need to be looking at that. But just even in organizations, we can change policies to make the promise of AI feel like it's worth investing in for employees.
I'm wondering if most organizations even have mapped out what the promise of AI was to their employees, because
Mhm.
they're very focused on stakeholders, shareholders, but not viewing their employees as stakeholders and or saying, this is what AI can do for you. Like, I don't feel like
Yeah.
a lot of organizations have explicitly said that or put that in their EVP as either.
It's a major problem. The Microsoft Trends report that came out in collaboration with LinkedIn found that 60% of CEOs don't believe that there's a strategy. And this is what happened. And there was this really interesting report too that showed that technology wasn't even on the radar of sort of business disruptions up until the last 2 years. And it went from not even being on the top set of, stressors that CEOs were feeling to sixth place. And then in a year to first place. This last year, it was like first place, biggest disruptors to business. And so everyone's really just adopted AI because I need to adopt AI. I need to show that I'm competitive, but with no strategy. And you need to know your why before you adopt AI. Know your why before you adopt AI. So then you can then communicate that. And that lends to managers being able to communicate the why.
I'm curious about what organizations, or are there organizations that are getting this right?
Yeah, there's just so much right now that I'm seeing that are making it difficult for people to stay on track with some of that investment. I talked about Bain and Company in the book. I mean, they're doing things like even just cold rooms for women that have menopause, for example. It seems again so simple, like just having spaces that are you can work in that are cooler. But for me, as a perimenopausal 47-year-old, I had the worst brain fog in writing this last book in the first 6 months. And I actually felt like I'm not supposed to be a writer anymore. The amount of questioning of my capacity and my efficacy was really wild. And then it was going to my doctor, and she was able to just say, I think you're going through perimenopause. And
Yeah.
that was such a weight lifted. I really did feel like I was not good at my job anymore. And I think of women at this age, peak career, feeling ineffective. And so there are organizations that are saying we can't have that. We need to do things that are more responsible for women. We still are seeing, which I feel is like these big declines in keeping women in the workforce. We're at the thinnest executive pipeline that we've seen yet in history. For the first time in a decade, global CEOs of women have gone down, and it was already like a shit number in the first place. I think it was 11.5%. Now it's 10.5%.
Yeah.
Celebrating incremental gains. I'm very over that. And so I think work isn't working for women. We need diverse thinking. We've demonstrated in Anita Williams-Woolley's work at Google that collective intelligence increases when you have more female gender representation on teams. I want people to start looking at this as this is a business strategy, not a benevolent strategy. This is not to be benevolent. I'm not being an ally. I'm being a capitalist in my executive pipeline. And so the more we can look at it as a business imperative versus a benevolence imperative, the more I think we'll put that into the strategic priority set. And right now, it's a lot about allyship and doing good, and not seeing diversity represented in leadership is actually being really good for business. And the more that we can change that narrative and talk about it in that way, the less it's something that can be cut out. And I do think that, and you would have read in the book that I do think the way we've done it so far hasn't been really successful.
What I've always tried to reconcile is the data. Even though these programs haven't been around for that long, when you look at the history of work, I appreciate that. And when you look at the data, it's some of the strongest data sets out there in terms of how powerful your ROI is on inclusion, belonging, women in leadership roles, diversity, happiness at work. I mean, all of the things that you're talking about, hope, purpose, right? The data is there. The return on investment is there, hard dollars. And you can make the monetary case for all of this. And I'm wondering, is it the narrative around we need to start talking about hard dollars on this all the time when we talk about this stuff to sell it more? What is this flip in the narrative? I can't figure it out.
You know what? It's always going to be a bottom line issue. And as we start to see a deficit in our talents, resources, and this is what I think Anita in the book that I love that she shared is just like, we're wasting this incredible talent pool, and no one seems to really care that it's slipping away. And what I'm seeing is, and I think it's actually in a lot of ways maybe beneficial to women, is that women are saying, I'm going to start to build up my own IP. I'm going to
Mhm.
start up my own companies. And because they are so good at it, they're going to create their own space and they're going to start to demonstrate that they don't really need that other infrastructure. And we're going to create this whole economy of women leading organizations and actually having patents and having opportunities for other women because women will hire more women because you hire like. And so as that starts to break ground, which we are seeing, we're seeing so many more women move into part-time roles so that they can work on some of these other things. We are seeing like IP for women increase. We are seeing women opt out of workplaces that are not inclusive and moving to organizations that are. So they're demonstrating with their feet. And so the more that becomes something that is a bottom line issue, which might take a while to show up, maybe irrationally optimistic of me, but the data feels like it supports it, that's what's going to start to happen. And we're going to see this very different shift in this economy for women.
Well, it's funny. Francesca and I just did a whole thing. I mean, women drive the global economy. We own almost all of the purchasing power globally. And a recent article said if the economy is running well, you might want to start by thanking women today. And one of the stats that recently came out was in 2023 alone, 49% of small businesses for the first time, more women than men are starting small businesses. So I think, I mean, the stats are showing they're leaving in droves because they're leaving places where they're not considered.
They aren't. And policies like return to office are actually extremely exclusive for women.
Mhm.
And until we're solving the second shift and making sure that unpaid labor is balanced across both, teams in the family, this is the only option for women. So those exclusive policies, women are just like, that's not what I want. The core heart of the book is that we faced our mortality as a collective. And what happens to the brain when you face your mortality is you actually start to subconsciously reprioritize things that are about legacy leaving. It's more about what matters, in the world, what matters to you as a human being. And so for women, they felt years of just having to take care of their family, protect them from such risk. It was a very strong emotional experience for a lot of families and women in particular. And so now they're looking at it after they face their finitude. They're like, this thing that I'm doing that's toxic, that does not include me, that does not care about me. I don't really see that as something that in when a life is short mentality that I can accept anymore. And when you're not faced with that, you really don't see that there's something that's sort of like happening very quickly. You don't have the same urgency on it. But that experience and polycrisis has put urgency on us to leave legacy, has put urgency on us to do more with our lives. And so, for the people that are pro social, for the people that care about the world and care about these things, they're looking at work as not something that matters as much, but they're still equally ambitious. And that's the thing that's cool about women. They're like, how do I make work fit into my life instead of trying to fit into work's expectation of me? And I think that's like where it's going to be really cool. I have gone back a few times to Riyadh. So Saudi Arabia has this real focus on 2030 women empowerment goals. So I also think other countries are going to go, okay, we always looked at that country as being so far behind. It wasn't progressive. And they're putting this huge investment in women right now because they do understand it from an economic standpoint. If one of the things that Saudi Arabia does understand is wealth and how to build wealth. And they are just looking at women as their builders of wealth right now.
All right, Jennifer, we're going to move into a rapid round. This is not a pop quiz. It's meant to be fun and to get a little more personal to get to know you. We'll start with a work question. It's 2030. What do you think work's going to look like?
Oh, this is such a great question. It's going to look the same, but I do think that we're going to see incremental differences in a more pro-social way.
Okay, finish this sentence. For companies to build work cultures everyone wants, leaders need to.
Model the behavior. Employees can't be what they can't see. Leaders need to model the behavior.
Next sentence. Work should feel more like blank and less like blank.
More like fuel for, your sense of accomplishment, less like a grind.
Damn right.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. What music are you listening to right now?
I'm super into Olivia Dean. I don't know if you've heard her, but
Okay,
she's
no.
so good. And she has a song called Dive. I would highly recommend it, but she just became super well known because I guess she has a song on the Bridget Jones new movie.
Oh,
And so people are learning about her, but she's great.
Okay. Is Dive one of your favorite songs from her, or do you have a favorite that's like on repeat?
Well, Lola Young, right, does the song Messy, which I really like, and she does a version of it, which I love. But Dive, yeah, there's something about it that's sort of catchy and lovely, but a lot of her songs are like that. And I really like Bakar, Bakar. If you just want to have a good vibes, hang out in your car and feel it kind of like moving your shoulders, yeah, that's a good one.
Gotta get some jams for my Trader Joe's parking lot. Buckle going on. All right. What are you reading right now?
Oh, so I like almost solely read fiction, which is hilarious as a nonfiction writer. But I'm reading Coco Meller's book. I don't know if you have heard of her. She's really good. It's, oh God, I just blanked on the book, on the name. It's Frankenstein and, oh God, I can't remember. But it's really such a fun little book. And she's got cool, I don't know, really cool ways of thinking about characters. And I'm also reading James, which is this cool book that is, so I read multiple books at the same time and I'm always reading. I have a book with me. I carry it with me all the time. I read constantly, like I'm a super reader. And James is the idea of Reed telling the story of Huck Finn from Jim's point of view.
How
And it's
fun.
really, so far, it's really neat. So one sort of beachy reads, and then the other is like, I got to have some meat in my brain.
Okay. Okay. Who do you personally really admire?
It's a really good question because there's lots of people that I really do admire, but I would say my mom. So my mom was the first nurse practitioner in all of Canada. And
Oh.
she's in the books, and she didn't ever talk about her stuff because she was a nurse and a nurse practitioner. And so you kind of would come home. She had told me later on in life that she would come home and she had like had to deal with really traumatic, awful things, especially in a lot of car accidents in rural towns where she lived. And even when we moved, to Canada, like to Eastern Canada, what happened was just like this sense of, I don't know, having to come home and be a good mom and also have to deal with all this stuff. And when she moved, she had to give up being a nurse practitioner because there did not exist in Ontario. So she was like, okay, well, then I'll figure something else out. She was very resilient. So she ended up teaching nursing at McMaster University, which was huge, and then working in ICU at McMaster Hospital, which is one of like, it's a sick kids hospital. So they do just great work. And then she decided that she wanted to stop nursing and started her own manufacturing company and sold quilts and had like multiple stores and a whole bunch of sewers working for her as like the final stage in her life. And I just feel like, as a person that we never thought was the entrepreneur, I realized she was. And she just didn't just do things like in small ways. She just did things in big ways, but she was so quiet about it. And it wasn't until later on that I went, wow, like you have subconsciously been my person that I've admired, that I've tried to mirror my life after.
Okay, last one. What's one piece of advice you want everyone to have?
This has been hugely beneficial for me because I didn't learn this until I burned out. And it's, you can have anything, not everything. And it's always about a series of choices, and we constantly want to have everything, and you can have anything. You just need to choose in your priority structure what matters most. And when you have that really figured out, that anything feels like everything.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks for sharing with us. Yeah. I love it.
So easy to talk to you both. It doesn't even feel like
I had fun.
recorded. Yeah, this is great.
This episode was produced, edited, and all things by us, myself, Mel Plett, and Francesca Ranieri. Our music is by Pink Zebra. And if you loved this conversation and you want to contribute your thoughts with us, please do. You can visit us at yourworkfriends.com, but you can also join us over on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn community page, and we have the TikTok and Instagram. So please join us in the socials. And if you like this and you've benefited from this episode and you think someone else can benefit from this episode, please rate and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. That helps keep us going.
Take care, friends.
Bye, friends.
Bye, friends.